it was a positive experience, no doubt. So.
Yes, in fact, the situation of my being there, it was because Father Julian, my brother and teacher, he had a car accident and broke his leg into pieces. So he had to keep bed for several months. He had all the churches to travel, he couldn't travel. He had all the courses for the seminary, he couldn't teach. So at that time we had 4 seminarians, and one, it was me. I was a deacon already. I was ordained a deacon in Omaha by Bishop PIVARUNAS. And the situation in Argentina was pretty bad for studying. So Father Julian was offered by Father Sambo at the time to receive these seminarians. And so that's why we came to the United States, to Michigan, to the Detroit area. And I finished my studies of theology there. During that time, while I was there, Father Samuel was consecrated a bishop by Bishop Aguera. And then when I was, my plan was to go back to Argentina and get ordained by Bishop PIVARUNAS down there in Argentina. But during that time, 2003, there was a lot of, problems, and we had 4 or 5 presidents in 24 hours. So Argentina was a complete disaster. So Bishop PIVARUNAS told me, all right, it's not going to be wise to go to Argentina now. So, and he wrote a letter. He kindly wrote a letter to Bishop Sandon asking him if he had no problem of ordaining me. So Bishop Sandon said, it's up to you. So he gave me the option, and I said, all right, if the Bishop PIVARUNAS is agree with that, I will be ordained here. I was ordained on June the 2003. I've been there for 1 year and a half, more or less. And, as Father said, they followed the thesis. I was, at that time, the seminary was very, very free. I mean, I was allowed to follow the rubrics of Pius XII. I was allowed to choose the bishop for ordaining me, even though at the last Bishop Sandor ordained me. But later on, yes, they got a little harder with that. That's history, no? But I was very friend of the bishop, now Bishop Savoy. He was my companion at the seminary. I had a very nice remembrance of the seminary time. It was, they treated me very well. I felt like at my home. I was trying to get back to Argentina, of course, but the thesis was not a problem, and the rubrics was not a problem. After that, yes, they ask you for the thesis, and they ask you for following the rubrics of Pius X, which I'm not agree with that.
Just if I could just add something to that, we should not be surprised that there are differences of opinions amongst clergy, because if we could perfectly get along at every point, then what's the point of having a pope? But the pope is what unifies the church, and so there are going to be, without the pope, especially for a long time, there's going to be differences of opinion. And I want to really stress this over. The difference is over policy, And over things that are debatable, they haven't been settled by the church, but on doctrine, we completely agree. That's the Catholicity of the church.
I will strike the shepherd and the flock will be scattered, right?
So we have more, I tell people, we have more unity than you realize. We are in complete agreement in doctrine. But policy and debatable issues like the thesis of Bishop Gerard de Marie, you can debate that. You can't, until the highest authority resolves it, it's a debatable question. The church allows that. So we're talking about more questions about the papacy. What's the difference between an anti-pope and a false pope? An anti-pope is when there is a true pope and then there's some other pope allegedly elected. So basically you have to have a two-pope situation. You can only be one true pope. And a false pope is when was Vatican II popes. They've taught outright heresy, so that they keep it a false popes. So that's the difference between those two. I'm going to go to Father Chad Ripperger. He's got some pretty good talks, and you listen to him. He's Fraternity of St. Peter. The tragedy, though, is that, as far as I know, he's not validly ordained because this is the deceit of the Fraternity of St. Peter. They have bishops that are ordained in a new rite, or consecrated a new rite, and then they come and do the ordinations. So if they're not validly ordained bishops, then they can't make priests. They're not valid bishops. He does seem to have he has a lot of wise things to say, and again, if he's wanted to work with us, first thing you have to do is ask the bishop to conditionally ordain him, because you don't want to be receiving doubtful sacraments. That should not be happening. Approximately what year did modernism enter the seminaries, both major and minor? How many years after this change in teaching before traditional seminary became available? We have to remember that modernism was so bad in the early 20th century that Pope St. Pius X issued his major encyclical on modernism, and that was published in 1907. So that's how bad it was. People were really, I'm just wondering why that was happening. Well, because of bad philosophy, such as Immanuel Kant, his teachings unfortunately had a lot of influence, and I consider him to be the father of modernism. He died in the early 1800s, about 100 years, I believe, before. But in Italy, a lot of bishops were noticing their priests leaning towards modernism, so it was a very timely encyclical, and Pope St. Pius X came down with a hammer on modernism. He really drove it underground. Ironically, one of the best friends of Angelo Roncalli, I forget his first name, but his last name was Buonaiuti. He was very much a modernist. And the story goes that Angelo Roncalli, who later on became John the 23rd, he was using some of his material to teach in the seminary. So this was before 1907. But just to show you how the gall of his Father Buonaiuti, because he was ordained at the same time as Father Roncalli, he wrote a refutation of the encyclical on modernism and sent it to the Pope. Can you imagine that? And he tried to, say, well, Holiness, how can you find problem with this? How can you find problem with that? And he died excommunicated from the church, I think in the 1940s. So modernism was very much coming into the attacking the church from within, you might say. So thank God for Pope St. Pius X, who gave the death knell to modernism. And when you look at what he condemned, you see practically everything he condemned approved and accepted at Vatican II. So it drove modernism below the surface, but it didn't go away, unfortunately, and it came back with a vengeance. There's a story behind the controversy of iconoclasm. Well, that was one of the heresies in the, I believe, like the 600s or 700s, where one of the Eastern emperors was afraid that people would not, I'm probably forgetting this, but he was afraid of not being honored properly, so he banned all images except for himself. And then that meant all religious iconography got banned as well. So that was a heresy condemned by the church, saying that there's something inherently wrong with statues and pictures. But it's not, we obviously can't worship them, that would be idolatry. But have you ever right there on iconoclasm, was that one of the Eastern emperors? Yeah, Leo the Isaurian, I think was his name. So, okay. What's interesting is, with the liturgical change of the Vatican II is basically they became iconoclasts, right? They threw out all of the beautiful statues, pictures. So many of the pictures and statues we have were rescued from the Vatican II. And by any definition, is that not a sacrilege to take a statue, smash it into pieces, and throw it into the dumpster? By any definition, is that not a sacrilege? Yes, and it was happening wholesale. And many of the statues that we have in probably every statue upstairs was rescued from the Vatican II Church because it was rescued before it was going to be smashed. So that's iconoclasm right there. And as Father Chikala points out in his book, Work of Human Hands, in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, they said, we really don't need all these statues and pictures. The people are the real decoration. That's ridiculous. Okay, what should we do every day to do what Our Lady of Fatima asks us? We've been preaching it throughout the Fatima Conference. Pray, sacrifice, offer reparation, consecrate yourselves to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, spread this devotion to her Immaculate Heart to others. And that's our daily goal. And we're getting a big impetus for that here at this Fatima Conference. Last two questions. That's all that's left. How does salvation apply to those who never heard of Christianity in regards to invincible ignorance and baptism of desire? Invincible ignorance of itself does not save. One has to have some kind of supernatural faith. And I believe it's St. Thomas Aquinas who says that if a person doesn't have a missionary come to him, God can even reveal it internally, the essential doctrines of the faith, like the Trinity, the Incarnation, the Redemption. They have to have some kind of supernatural faith. So of itself, invincible ignorance doesn't save. They have to live a morally upright life. They have to practice the supernatural faith, and they also have to make an act of perfect contrition for any mortal sins that they've committed. So that's why the missionaries sacrifice so much to go spread the faith, because, it's very small chances of people being able to acquire that supernatural faith without the gospel being preached to them. So it's again part of the missionary calling of the church to bring the gospel to all nations, as our Lord said to the apostles. And how were the souls of the Old Testament admitted to heaven without being baptized? Well, nobody was admitted until our Lord redeemed us. So anybody that anybody that died in mortal sin, they obviously went to hell. Whether New Testament or Old Testament. Those that there were some obviously who died that they had to do their purgatory time. And when they got done with their purgatory time, then they had to go and wait in limbo. So that's where all of the faithful, all the good people were waiting. In the Old Testament, it was obligatory, the rite of circumcision for boys, and that was an equivalent to baptism. I believe that removed original sin. If Your Excellency and Father can confirm that. For baby girls, obviously, there would have to be some kind of a dedicating service or ceremony that the parents would do for their daughter in order to remove original sin. And this was in view of our Lord's redemption. And if somebody committed a mortal sin, the only way to get it off the soul is an act of perfect contrition. They did not have the sacrament of penance, for which imperfect contrition suffices. So that's how salvation worked in the Old Testament. But there was no obligation of baptism because it hadn't been made obligatory yet. Our Lord made that obligatory. Baptism of water must take place if it's at all possible. If it's impossible, then baptism of blood or baptism by desire will suffice. So if you have anything to add, Your Excellency, your Father?
Father,
Yes.
the question about invincible ignorance, the gospel at the end of Mass is the light that lightens every man that comes into the world. So somehow.
Right. I was trying to think of an analogy that would work. It's like if you have a bright light in a room, everybody's going to feel it, but they may have something blocking, that light from, they're sitting behind a divider maybe. So there has to be some kind of a realization of the essential doctrines of the faith. That God is a creator, that He rewards and punishes. Paul talks about that specifically. And then in practice, as Father O'Connell says in the Catechism, they meet, somebody's about to die, you have to instruct them on those essential doctrines, the Trinity, incarnation, redemption. It's there, but the fact that they never were exposed to it is like that divider was blocking the light from them. So it does enlighten every man, but there's that ignorance. They don't know. They don't know. That's what the whole purpose of the missionaries is, to go and share the gospel. I was really gratified to read that in St. Thomas, who talks about it. Internal revelation would be done if need be. Or God could send an angel to reveal these essential doctrines. But again, what's the chances of that? So that's why it's so important to teach the gospel, to spread the gospel. And, the gospel, if you go to the right website, you'll see the true gospel preached, but you'll also see, unfortunately, many places where false gospel is preached.
Well, the internet wasn't around.
The internet was not around back then, so.
Okay, I guess in thinking about it, I just want to correct, maybe add to something I said earlier. I mentioned Bishop Sanborn said he didn't want to work with us. Well, that's like publicly. But there is certainly cooperation. Like I can think of one of our parishes where our priest is close to one of his priests, and they share a sick call. I can call them up. Father, can you do this sick call for me? I can't do it today, or whatever. So there is cooperation that way, and certainly cordial relations. But he doesn't want to be publicly listed as connected with us. So I would just simply say, getting back to that question, we, CMRI, certainly have no problem associating with anyone who's a faithful Catholic, and we do.
And if and when we get a true Pope, we will all line up to submit to him. And that's in God's hands. So I was question, but I think we can do a quick question from the floor.
Sorry, it brought this up as you were explaining. So I've actually heard other people accuse CMRI of being dogmatic, stating a context.
We are dogmatic.
Well, in this case, Father is saying that you know, it seems like he would give the sacraments to somebody who believes in the material formal.
Yeah, but that's permitted. You can believe the material thesis is, you know, this happened many times in the history of the church. For example, in the Middle Ages, the Franciscans and Dominicans debated the Immaculate Conception, and the church hadn't made definitive teaching on that. So if it's not defined yet, the church has that liberty of discussion. So there's no way to rule on the material thesis. So it can definitely be followed.
Well, how can you claim that your dogmatic state of conscience saying that nobody's ruled?
Well, that doesn't mean, but we know that this can be debated as to how the situation of the church works today. You know, we're convinced that there is simply not popes, period. You know?
I am too, but.
Yeah, right.
I'm asking for it.
Right. You know, basically, is are you Catholic? That's the question we ask. Are you Catholic? You're not denying any doctrines of the faith. We're more than happy to have you, you know, work with you, you know, be in affiliation with you. Okay. So the announcement I have from Father Ananias that we will, you know, leave earlier, we will have the blessing of religious articles. We'll do it right here in the parish hall. We found it works quite well this way. You might have a lot of items, so just spread them out on the table, and we'll just bless them right here. And some of the items get special blessings, and some of them just get the general blessing, but we'll take care of it right here in the parish hall. So we'll start in about 5 minutes with that. And then
What time is supper on your schedule?
what time is dinner?
6:30.
Okay, so dinner is at 5. And 6